The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Good morning. This is Deborah Monk welcoming you to the Writer's Block Podcast NH. Today we are going to start a new series called The 10 Most Common Writing Mistakes, and joining me is Barb Wallace. Barbara Wallace is the author of nearly 24 romance and mystery novels. She sold her first book in 2009 and has gone on to sell nearly 1 million books in 13 countries. Her books have been honored by the Booksellers Best Award, the New England Reader's Choice Awards, and the Romantic Times Book Awards. Welcome, Barb. I'm so glad you could be here with me today.
Thanks. It's nice to be back.
So we're going to do a series, the 10 most common writing mistakes. Today we're starting with number 1, which is starting in the wrong place. What do you mean by that, Barb?
All right. I guess first we should start with what a good beginning should do.
Okay.
All right. A good beginning should grab the reader.
Yep.
It needs to set the tone for the novel. So it needs to you need to know right off, is it going to be a suspense novel? Is it going to be funny? Is it going to be a women's fiction? It needs to introduce the main character or characters so that you can empathize with them. You need to set their world. And it needs to hint at what the big problem is going to be in the book.
Right. The one of those, my favorite is set the tone. I read the first line, and if the first line or two, the first paragraph doesn't pull me in, I want to know what I'm getting. And I'm either drawn in or I'm not. And so I hate when a book starts and you think, oh, I'm getting it's going to be a great romantic suspense type story. And then you read on and, it really drizzles out. It's just romance or it's just suspense. And when they started with the illusion that it was going to be both.
And that's one of the common mistakes is, I should have added, it needs to start with action. And a lot of times writers will mistake story action for actual action. And as a result, they'll break the promise with the reader. They'll start the book with something that's very suspenseful, like she's lost in the woods and she can't find her way out. And the book's really about how she inherited her aunt's bed and breakfast down the road. But they just wanted to come up with something that really grabbed the reader. They go, I got to start with a hook.
Right.
But if you break the promise to the reader, where if you give them something that's super suspenseful or super heart-wrenching at the beginning, and the rest of the book's going to be funny, or you start with a funny scene and then it's going to get deeply emotional, the reader's going to get turned off. Because you need to give them that opening scene also has to deliver, the promise of your opening scene has to be delivered on the rest of the book.
Now, you just said the difference between story action and action. What do you mean by that?
Okay, well, when we say story action, what we mean is you need to start the story. That doesn't mean that there has to be physical action. It doesn't have to be a big...
The skyscrapers blowing up.
Right, or her running for her life, or a murder. It means you're going to put the action, what happens in place. We like to say the problem begins when.
Right.
So the story action can be as simple as a conversation. It could be someone reading a will saying, and she leaves you
nothing.
$40 million. Or she
everything.
Leaves you nothing. The cat's inheriting everything.
Right.
That's the story action.
I think your son should be worried about that.
He is. But that's the story action. It propels the story forward, but it doesn't have to be physical action.
Because not every story is a great big action type of story.
Exactly. A good example would be, like I just finished a few months ago, The Alice Network, which is a great book. And it's about searching for somebody who was disappeared during World War II. But the story begins with her on a boat, pregnant. Like that's, she's not doing anything great other than standing on a boat going, oh, I'm going to go to Switzerland and give this baby up.
Wow. Well, that's a pretty heart-wrenching beginning.
Right. But it's a book about chasing, it's a book about war crimes in World War I and chasing Nazis. But it also plays in with the baby. But there's not a lot of action. It's her just thinking about the fact that she's giving it up. But it propels the story forward because now okay, here's a woman who's pregnant out of wedlock and she's heading to England to solve this problem.
Right.
So it can be something very simple. The idea is just you're moving the story forward.
Okay.
No, I was going to say, so like I said, don't confuse it with real action and that's where a lot of times you get the broken promise because people think, oh, I got to have something that grabs them.
Right. Well, I did two examples. So I'm going to ask you, which is the better beginning? So I'm just going to give you a line of what, just to tell you what the scene's about, and then I'll give you two options of how it starts. So a woman has just found out her husband is cheating. Do you think it would be better if we start this scene 20 years ago at her fairy tale wedding? Or do you think it would be better if we start the morning she forgot her laptop and has come home from work early and hears grunts coming from the bedroom?
Yeah, second. And actually,
that was so much fun. I love doing these things.
Actually, you would start with her standing outside the door listening to the grunts.
Right.
A lot of people would be tempted to have her coming home and looking at her beautiful house.
Is someone lifting something heavy in the room? Why are they grunting?
Yes, they're lifting something
lifting
heavy.
something heavy.
He's heavy, and she's, and it's a lot of weight to lift up and down.
Yeah.
Push-ups.
Okay, here's another one.
I think the word you were looking for is groans. Is that one of the common mistakes? Using the wrong word?
Yeah, but I think we meant grunts.
Yeah, we meant grunts. When was that?
That's gross.
Remember, they've been married 20 years, so he's over 40. Okay.
That was a dig.
Yeah, it was. So Donna's going to rob a bank. Should we start the morning when she's having breakfast of Cheerios and bananas and is making chocolate chip pancakes for her son? Or should we start at the doctor's when her son has just been diagnosed with a rare cancer that there is a new treatment in England, but her insurance won't cover it?
Neither. I would start with her robbing the bank.
Wow. Really? Yeah, I thought I was giving her motivation.
Okay. See, what's the story about? Her bank robbing career or her
internal motivation about saving her son's life?
Right.
Oh, good point.
You would start with her robbing the bank, and you'd be like, "Why is she robbing the bank?" Or planning the bank robbery. She's sitting outside saying, "Okay, here's the alarms, this, that." But I would start with her. The problem begins. I mean, yes, I suppose you could say the problem begins when she was
in the doctor's office.
And yes, you could do that if you felt like you wanted to make her the most sympathetic. I should say, some of these rules are meant to be broken.
Well, plus, you're absolutely right. Which is the story really about? Is it really about saving her son, or is it really about the bank robbery? And then whichever answer that is exactly where to start.
Right.
Because you can fill in her motivation later if you need to.
Exactly.
Interesting. So when you talk about the big problem, you said we should start and expose the big problem. What do you mean by that?
The big problem is going to be the main conflict that the heroines, it should hint at it, the main conflict that the heroine or hero, or I should say use protagonist, actually, that's the better term to use since you're not necessarily writing heroes and heroines. So the protagonist is going to face their big conflict, their big challenge in the book that they have to grow and get over.
Right.
To get to their happy ending,
the hero's
or whatever
journey.
the ending, their journey. So you need to hint at that, whether it's they're standing at the front step of the bed and breakfast that their grandmother gave them, and it's their new start. Then you should hint slightly at that this is a fresh start, and she's running away from something, or they arrive at the crime scene, and there's the dead body. That's an obvious one, or like even in women's fiction, like you start. One of your books where she's staring at a pregnancy stick. Well, that's her big problem.
Right. Ooh, look at me. I'm good.
Yeah, because that's where the story starts. It didn't start with her getting married. It didn't start with her getting up and sending her child off to school. It started with her looking at the stick that she just peed on and saying, "Holy crap, I'm pregnant."
Right.
So, and that her journey is going to be involving dealing with that pregnancy and her change of life. And the thoughts she's having while she's looking at the pregnancy stick, that's hinting at the stuff that's coming on.
That's for sure. I did a good job in that book.
Now,
Well-Behaved Woman, Coming Undone.
That's it. Now,
on Amazon.
There are sometimes, like I said,
and speaking of books, Barb has a new book out called One Night in Province. Now this one, because for our listeners, Barb and I are in a writing group together, although we haven't actually been meeting much lately. But so this one I haven't read, so I can't wait to get it. One Night in Province by Barbara Wallace. It's a Harlequin romance.
And it's out in August.
And it's out in August. Oh, yeah. But I can hold it in my hot little hands here right now.
Yeah.
How come I can have it in my hands before?
Because I get author copies.
Oh. Wow, well, you'll have to sign this at the end, writer's block.
Now, I was going to say, there's some exceptions to the whole starting with the action thing. Sometimes you do have to give some backstory beforehand if it's going to help the character. Like we said with finding out the definition, finding out that her son is dying.
Yeah.
Maybe she does need that beforehand to make her sympathetic. A really great example is Loretta Chase's Lord of Scoundrels. The story really begins when the hero and the heroine meet. But she starts it in a prologue when the hero is 12 years old and he's horribly bullied. I say 12, he's a child. He's at boarding school. He's horribly, horribly bullied. If you didn't have that scene and you started right when the story started, you would think that he's the biggest asshole in the world, and you would be turned off by him immediately because he's not nice at the beginning of the story.
Got it.
He's a jerk. But by seeing that prologue and seeing what he went through, then you're like, okay, I want to know what happened to make him so awful.
Right.
Because he was a sweet little boy. And
in the very, very beginning.
So you do sometimes do that. I did it once with a book where the hero, when the hero and heroine first meet, it's because she starts at a vacation home and she's chasing a bird around that's gotten stuck in her house. And he comes in and he's kind of a jerk to her. But the book, the very beginning of the book is him waking up from a post-traumatic stress disorder nightmare. So you realize, okay, this guy's kind of screwed up and that's why he's antisocial.
Right.
So when he first comes in and he's kind of rude to her,
we understand.
You are like, okay, I can see where she's kind of curious about him. And you're willing to buy that she might be curious about him. Whereas if you didn't have anything sympathetic about him beforehand, you'd be like, well, why does she care what this jerk thinks?
Right.
So,
but don't you think we should warn writers that prologues usually aren't necessary?
yes.
Right. If you feel you need a prologue, you're on the rare occasion you do, but for the most part, prologues are cheating.
I think so.
That you're not really starting in the heat of the moment.
That's my personal opinion. Yes.
Right. I think so too.
I think that a lot of times people use it thinking they have to establish backstory.
Right.
And they don't.
Right.
You can weave it in later on. The other example I was going to give you, another reason you sometimes will do the story difference is if it reflects the theme.
Okay.
My friend Susan Meyer gave me this example, which is, when does Wizard of Oz start? When does the story of Wizard of Oz start?
When the tornado comes?
Right. But what do you have beforehand? You have that whole...
Yeah, I don't really remember.
You have that whole time where the woman's taken away Toto, and she's in black and white, and you hear Kansas and how much she doesn't like Kansas, and she's dreaming about going further. And then the story really kind of begins when she lands in Oz and she has her adventure in Oz. But if you didn't have that beginning, the "it's no place like home"
wouldn't
message,
matter.
You need to see home so that she can learn
to go back home.
Great.
Why did the lady take the dog?
Because he was nippy.
Really?
I think she thought he was. Doesn't it? She takes him because he's chasing her and barks at her, and she doesn't like him because he bit her.
You're asking the wrong dude.
He bit her.
Oh, okay.
Although I've been looking for ruby red slippers for my entire life in my size.
I have too.
But
I have some, but they're not his size.
Not
He's
shocked.
tried.
I'm so not shocked you have ruby red slippers.
Now, another term that you and I use in our group, I don't know if this is a common term, but I do think I have found when I first started writing, you often would say to us, and I think it was you, who would say, okay, these first 5 pages, they're good, they're information that we're going to need, but they're throat clearing.
Yes.
And
we all do it.
Yes. And I think that for a lot of people, myself probably included, sometimes I need to do that. That's helping me get familiar with the characters. So sometimes I might write 10 pages before I realize, wait, 10 pages in is a better beginning.
Right. And a lot of times, I've done that too. You don't know until you're really into the story where the story actually starts.
Right.
And, it's not uncommon to have written a couple chapters and suddenly realize, oh, really, the story starts now.
Right. And I think a lot of beginning writers try so hard to make it have such a great hook at the beginning. And I think they manufacture it.
Yes.
Whereas if they let themselves, write naturally, maybe 10 pages in or 3 pages in or 5 pages in, they might find, wow, that's a great beginning right there.
Right. And they kill themselves for this perfect opening line.
Right.
And a lot of times I think they get stymied on, I have to have this great opening line, and then they're frozen.
Right.
And
they make all the mistakes we're talking about because they fake it.
Right. And I always, Susan Mallory gives great advice, which is throw up the story on the page and then pick out the peas and carrots.
Peas and carrots? Who? No,
Susan Mallory.
Do you know her?
No, but I don't know her personally. I've been to lectures by her, and she's the #1 New York Times bestseller. Clearly, she knows what she's doing. And one of my favorite lectures by her is she says, throw
the peas and carrots? I've been using that all along. I thought I made that up.
Okay, Deb Monk said it.
No, I really didn't. I must have gotten it from you, who got it from her.
She did it several talks by it, but that's what she says.
Right.
Yeah, throw it up on the page and then pick out the peas and carrots.
Yes.
So especially with your beginning,
yeah,
go ahead and throat clear.
Right.
But then someone's going to tell you, all right, you don't need these first 5 pages, which is what I think every time we have critique group, almost all of us say, You don't need all this.
Right. We're always cutting words, which is always, well, for most of us, it's painful, except for our friend Denise, who writes really long.
Right. I tend to write really short. So when you say cut
and
words,
Nina hates it.
It makes me cry.
Yes.
But
well, hopefully this show has helped our listeners know how to make a good beginning. If you want to hear this episode again or share it with a friend, send them to the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. That's UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. You can find this podcast and the vodcast video on demand in case you want to watch it. Find this episode and all previous episodes on UnitedPodcast.tv and please subscribe.
UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. I don't care what the paper says. I'm just telling you what the website is.
All right, I'll add that in.
That explains why Manager messes it up every week. I just thought she was having problems.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.